Hey guys, Waterfowler41 here, and in today's video we are giving the 2020 Ram Rebel a much needed suspension upgrade. So if you can see, I got the truck pulled up on ramps, and the reason we did that is because we are going to be replacing the rear sway bar on the Rebel with the Roadmaster sway bar kit. So this is part number 1129135, and essentially what you get in the kit is everything you need to completely replace the factory sway bar kit. So you get the sway bar. This is an 1/8" solid steel, so this is a behemoth compared to the factory bar, and we're going to weigh it once we get the factory bar off just to kind of show the differences between this. You obviously get the new brackets to hold the thicker sway bar to the truck's factory mounting points, and then also in the kit you get some extremely bulky rear sway bar end links. So these are a direct replacement for the factory kits, and we'll do a side-by-side, but basically the factory kit or the factory suspension or factory end links look like toothpicks compared to these guys. With the sway bar, the reason you upgrade sway bars is basically you want to kind of load level your truck. If you do a lot of towing or if you do a lot of load hauling in the bed of the truck, you want to make sure that when you're on a turn, the truck stays flat instead of swaying outside and inside on turns. So this is going to be a relatively simple installation. I'll show you kind of step-by-step along the way of it. But in the kit, you also get not just the sway bar, the brackets, the end links, and whatnot. You get the hardware and then some Loctite to make sure everything's bolted in nicely. All right, so let's talk through the installation of the sway bar. And like I said, it's a relatively simple installation as long as you follow a couple key steps just to make sure everything's easier to lower down from the truck. While the factory sway bar is sort of a dinky one compared to aftermarket ones, it is still a bigger piece of metal. It's bulky, so you just want to make sure that when you're lowering it down, you're prepared to catch the weight of it. So as far as tools that you need, the first thing you're going to need is a 15mm socket, and this is to remove the factory brackets from the factory sway bar. And there's going to be a bolt on each side. You're going to pop those out. Then in order to remove the end links, you're going to need an 18mm wrench and an 8mm, I believe, socket. And the reason you do this is you use the 8mm on the end of it and then use the 18mm wrench to spin the nut to loosen up the end link joints from the sway bar and also from the mounting points on the truck. So let's go ahead and remove the factory bar, and let's take a look and I'll show you exactly what we're removing. All right, we are underneath the truck, and I just want to show you kind of the step-by-step process that I'm going to take to remove the factory sway bar. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the 15mm bolts that are holding this bracket on. On both sides, you remove those. That'll allow this sway bar to swing down. Then from there, we're going to leave the lower end, or we're going to try to leave this lower end link attached because we don't need to remove this since the whole end link is coming out. And then we're going to reach up there and undo that bolt. Now, my suspicion is it's either a 15 or 18mm bolt, but we're going to pop that guy out. And then from there, everything should lower down nicely. So again, even though this is kind of a dinky factory sway bar, it is still bulky and heavy, so just be careful when lowering it down. Okay, so I have the brackets unbolted on the passenger side there and the driver's side, and I left one bolt in there just so I could kind of control the lowering of it. So I'll just rest my knee up there, undo this guy the rest of the way, and from there, everything is down. So it pulls down nice and easy. So like I said, I'm going to leave this lower end link attached, and I'm just going to unbolt up here. That way everything's pretty easy and this all stays together because these are kind of a pain in the butt. However, if you were to replace this or remove this, basically what you would use is an 8mm socket here and then an 18mm wrench, and you would turn the nut while holding this, basically the shank part of the bolt in place. So basically just turn this nut and you're going to turn it counterclockwise to loosen up this end link. Alright, so I lied. It's actually a 16mm bolt up here. So a 16mm wrench is enough, all you need to remove that bolt. And the nut is welded to the frame, so you don't need anything on that side, which is nice. And this isn't really that crazy tight, so it's super easy to remove. So just like with the brackets down here, I have everything backed out just enough where it's just a few threads left before I can lower it. That way I can kind of control how this thing comes down. I'm doing this by myself, and this, like I said, it's a heavy, bulky bar. So just out of precaution, leave that bolt in there for now. And you can see, got the driver's side one done as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this guy out, and then what I want to do is weigh this bar and weigh the Roadmaster one just to kind of show you the difference of how much more material you're getting in the Roadmaster bar, which from a suspension sway bar standpoint is going to translate into better load management. So let's go ahead and get this guy popped out of there and let's weigh him. Alright, so I have the factory sway removed from the truck and I have it side by side with the Roadmaster one. So huge difference between the bulkiness and the weight of the factory bar compared to the Roadmaster one on 3 points here. One, this sway bar is super light, which I suspect it's because this is a hollow sway bar, I believe, and the Roadmaster one is a solid steel sway bar. The other thing is, if you look at the measurement here, this is about 7/8 of an inch, whereas with the Roadmaster one, you are over an inch. You're at 1 1/8 of an inch. So super big improvement moving over to the thicker sway bar, which again is going to translate into better load management side to side. It's going to transfer that load and make sure that the truck around turns is going to stay flatter than it would with the factory sway bar. One thing I will say, this is not a race car, so I'm not expecting this thing to ever be planted like a Corvette around turns, but most of my driving is on the road, and if we could plan it a little bit better with the sway bar upgrade, by all means, let's go ahead and take a shot at doing this. I've upgraded the sway bars on a few trucks in the past, and huge improvement. It's definitely something you will notice on the first couple of turns you make, and then it'll basically just become, you know, an expectation when you're driving the truck that it's going to feel a little bit more planted than with the sway bar from the factory. So like I said, the factory end links are toothpicks compared to these guys. So yeah, side by side. This is a solid end link, and this is solid, but it's just, I mean, it's dinky. So what happens if you really beat the hell out of these things, you end up cracking these things, or they end up rusting through or whatnot. So let's go ahead and weigh this assembly, and then I will weigh the Roadmaster assembly, and then we'll get back to kind of the weight difference between the two, because I'm always curious when you get a solid sway bar like this, how much heavier that weighs compared to the factory kit. So let's go ahead and do that real quick and come back. Okay, real quick, I just grabbed the OEM assembly, held it, weighed myself, and then I grabbed all the Roadmaster stuff and weighed it. So basically the weight difference between the factory bar and the Roadmaster bar, in case you're interested, obviously this isn't kind of a real crazy metric, but it's 14 pounds. So this kit is 14 pounds heavier than the OEM kit, which is crazy because that's a lot of steel you get in that bar. So let's go ahead and start to install everything. So unlike with the factory sway bar, the first thing we're going to do with the Roadmaster one is we're going to attach these end links up to the top of the truck, and then we're going to attach the end links from the sway bar to the end link connection, and then from there roll this up into place. All right, ran into a little bit of a hiccup here. So I was touting how awesome it would be to be running the solid end links, and it requires a bolted, you use the hardware like that on top and like that on the bottom. Now, the issue I ran into is if you look up, let's flip around here. If you look up, where are we at? Right here. So this is the end link top mounting point. There is a welded nut on there, and that welded nut only accepts, obviously, a certain size bolt. So if we go back to our sway bar end links, this is the bolt that you need in order to fill in, fill in that bushing. So see, no slop. However, this is the bolt that comes off of the truck that attaches to that welded nut. Put that in there, a lot of slop. You don't want that much slop in here. So I suspect I either have the wrong end links here, or we just need to talk with Roadmaster and figure out what the right size bushing and sleeve needs to be installed on the top portion of this. As far as the bottom, you could use whatever you want. So these bolts will work on there. So in the meantime, what I did is I went ahead and transplanted my factory end links from the OEM sway bar onto the Roadmaster sway bar, and they fit perfectly fine. Again, they're not as bulky as the end links that came with the Roadmaster kit, but since that sleeve is too big to fit the factory bolt, and there's a welded nut on there that won't come off, we had to reuse these for now. But this will work for now to get the sway bar on there for the sake of my video. So the next thing, well, I guess if you've never removed end links, here's how you do it. You basically take a wrench. So this is an 18mm wrench, and then I have an 8mm socket on the end here. And this is to hold the bolt itself in place, or the end link attachment point in place. And then you just basically take your 18mm wrench and loosen up the nut that's right there. And then in order to tighten it, again, you just use the wrench to hold it, and then you tighten down the nut. Don't use the wrench to hold everything in place and then spin the actual end link itself. You'll end up kind of wearing out this end of it. Tighten the nut. The nut should be the only thing revolving around anything. This little shank here, the shaft of the screw or the bolt, should stay in one spot. All right, so like I said, I'm going to talk with Roadmaster and figure out what the issue is here. But basically a sleeve this size needs to be pushed into here. So it may be as simple as pulling this guy out and just finding a new sleeve to fit in there. We'll figure that one out. But for the sake of moving forward, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and throw some marine grade grease. So I have this laying around here. You get some in the kit as well. But we're going to put a healthy dose of marine grease in here. And the reason you use that is because it's going to be salt. It'll stand up to kind of the road crap that bounces up in there, and it'll be a little bit more waterproof than your typical bearing grease or whatnot. So we're going to grease these guys. We're going to get these slipped onto here. Then we're going to reinstall the bar by attaching it to the factory top mounting points first, and then these will bolt up right to the factory positions that the OEM bar came off of. Alright, so went ahead and attached the sway bar to the top mounting points, and I have it hanging there just like the factory bar was right before we removed it. Then I added grease into the bushings for the new sway bar. So I basically just dunked my finger in there and then just rubbed everything around in here. Once you get it on the bar, you can kind of move it back and forth just to make sure you have a nice even layer of grease. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to clip these bushings onto the bar itself, sort of in the area where the bracket's attached, and then we're going to basically pinch everything down. And then the way you attach these brackets is you do a little bit at a time. That way it pushes down and cinches down evenly. If you do one side then do the other, you kind of risk messing up the bushing. So a little bit on each side until this thing is nice and tight against the truck. Then the installation is complete. So these are the factory bolts that go through this port, these brackets here. They already have washers on there, so you're good to go. The kit does come with washers in case you want to use those or replace the bolts, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the factory hardware here since it's already there and it fits nicely. Alright, so the sway bar is loosely attached with everything. You kind of see some of the grease starting to squirt out a little bit. It's a very tight fit, which is good. That's kind of what you want there. You want to make sure there's enough grease. You could always go back in and wipe everything out. So the next thing I'm going to do is use a 15mm socket and tighten up the top and bottom. Just kind of keep going back and forth until this bracket is pulled nicely up against the frame. Then we'll go over to this side and do the same thing with that bracket. Top, bottom, switching off gradually just to pull everything down nice and flat. Then from that point, everything is attached and we're good to go to give it a little bit of a road test here. But clearance wise, everything fits nicely. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to get rocking and rolling with this. So let's go ahead and tighten these brackets up, and then we are done with the installation for now until we can figure out what's going on with our end links here. Alright, so there we have it. Everything is installed. So I went ahead and tightened up the brackets, wiped off all the grease, cleaned everything up. So we are good to go. So quick run through the installation as it is right now. I'm going to come back and figure out what the deal is with the end links here. But if you are using these, and it looks like you could use these perfectly fine. They fit fine on the sway bar, and we know that they will fit up top on the top mounting point. But as far as the installation, so to remove the factory sway bar, first thing you want to do is undo those brackets there, drop the whole sway bar down, and then go up. There's 16mm bolts up top, loosen those guys up, and then everything drops out. Then you just transplant your end link onto your sway bar, and then from there you just reverse the process. So push everything up and you tighten up the 16mm bolt up top first. Then you grease up your bushings, put the bracket over the top of the bushings, and then slowly push everything up in and tighten top, bottom, kind of alternate between the two so it tightens down nice and even. Now, the other thing you want to keep in mind is because of how sway bars work, the more lateral they are, the more parallel they are to the ground, the better they're going to function. So you have some adjustability on each side. So make sure as you're tightening up, you're trying to keep that sway bar as flat as possible so it could do what it needs to do. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and rip around the block here for a little bit, drive around, get a feel for how well this performs, and then give you my 2 cents after I've been driving on it for a little bit. Alright, so we have an end link solution. So after I went to install these guys and we found out that the original sleeves or bushing sleeves here would not fit with the bolted connection on the 2020 Ram Rebel, I got a hold of the Roadmaster team and I let them know, took some measurements of the bolt that we needed to fit, and they ended up sending me out a new bushing for the top here. So I went ahead and removed the factory end link just so we could do kind of a side-by-side here one last time. So we have the factory end link, which has your typical end link style down here where it's the bolt kind of a ball knuckle joint here. Use a socket here and then a wrench to undo that bolt. And then we're going to be going to a bolted connection with the Roadmaster end link. Other than durability, there's really no performance benefit of doing this. This is really just going to give you kind of a tougher end link at the end of the day. So got this one pulled out. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the driver's side one, and then we're going to go ahead and slap these guys in. Alright, so went ahead and installed the new end links with the new bushings that Roadmaster sent us. So first thing I did is I attached it up at the top, then I hung it down, and on one side I had to push the sway bar up a little bit to get the bolt to line up, and then once one side was on, then the other side lined up perfectly fine. So you put a bolt with a washer on one end, and then you slide it through the bushing, and then you put a washer on the other end with your nut, and then everything cinches down. These don't have to be super crazy tight because the stress is up and down. It's not side to side, so really you're not going to do much on the bolt itself. But yeah, let's go ahead and take it for a ride here, and I'll come back with some afterthoughts and kind of my opinion on how well the Roadmaster sway bar is performing. But overall, the installation was super easy with a minor little hiccup there as far as the bushing size. But I suspect that's because this kit is actually, it works for the 2500 and the 3500 trucks too, which I believe has a bolted connection up at the top instead of that welded nut with the factory OEM bolt that goes into that. So on the 2500 and 3500, it's basically a hole, and then you just thread the bolt, the hardware that comes in the kit, and everything works perfect. So in our case, we had to just replace that bushing, and we were good to go. All right, so I've had the Roadmaster sway bar on my 2020 Ram Rebel for a couple hundred miles here. So what are my thoughts on it? Honestly, I think this is definitely one of the most worthwhile investments you can make on your truck. So this truck comes with that hollow, lightweight steel sway bar, which does the job a little bit, but there's always room for improvement, especially over OEM suspension. So with the OEM, or with the Roadmaster sway bar, you get a solid steel sway bar with new solid end links. You get definitely some beefy bushings, and really what that translates into is a firmer ride for the Rebel going through turns and better load management in the back. So again, the reason why you increase the stiffness of your sway bar is so your truck doesn't have that tendency to sway through turns. And the heavier you get, or the more that you tow, or kind of more that you put in your bed, the more it's going to tend to want to sway. So you want to firm that up, and you do that via a stiffer sway bar. Now, if you're not loaded, running the sway bar still has benefits because, again, it firms up the ride and basically stops the rear end from swaying a lot. So if I had to do it again, would I do it? Absolutely. I think the sway bar was definitely a worthwhile investment on this truck. I'm very happy with the ride quality on it. Now, when you upgrade sway bars and you go to a stiffer sway bar, what's going to happen, and one thing that you do somewhat sacrifice, is if you hit a bump with your, let's say, the driver's side rear wheel, because the stiffer sway bar is going to translate some of that reverberation to the other side, you're going to feel bumps a little bit more in the rear end, especially when you're unloaded and you got nothing dampening any of the road noise or bumps or whatnot. As you load up, that's not going to be an issue as much, but definitely with a light truck bed, nothing in it, if you hit bumps with a really stiff sway bar, there's going to be a tendency for you to feel bumps a little bit more. Now, it's nothing crazy, and again, what you take away with that, or what you get hit with as far as, or I guess penalizing as far as feeling the bumps, the benefits on the fact that the truck just feels better driving on the road through turns and whatnot is far outweighed by that. So anyway, I absolutely love the sway bar. It was an awesome, very easy install. I'm happy with the quality of it. It looks great underneath the truck. But other than that, thank you very much for watching another Waterfowler video. If you guys got any questions, definitely leave them in the comments below. I'm going to leave a link to the Roadmaster sway bar down below in the description. But appreciate you guys watching. Like, comment, and definitely, it really helps me if you could subscribe to my channel. Appreciate it, and hope to keep the videos coming. Thank you very much, guys.